Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bryzer Show with me, Bryzer, here on grism.blogspot.com, where Mammy welcomes you to the best news aggregate site on the World Wide Web. It's good to have your company, folks. If you'd like to join us in the chat room, click on the HTML5 chat link on the top right-hand side of the page, just below the player of your choice. I'd like to also welcome listeners of Eurofolk Radio. Good to have you all on board. And I'd like to make it clear to all listening that I reserve all rights to my words, as do my guests. So welcome everybody, wherever you are. It's Monday, the 7th day of June 2021, and I hope you're doing well in these crazy times. We got two special guests for you this evening. The first is Jerry Marzinsky. I've had Jerry on the show a couple of months back, and we were talking all about the schizophrenia, psychiatry, and all the rest of it, and what's happening there, and that these about entities that are possessing people. And a very interesting show, what Jerry had to say. And we had another a guy that Jerry is working with, George, who also gave his experience of what was happening to him. So it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's very relevant to what's going on today. I'd like to welcome back as well SakTi, who's been on the show before, and we're going to be talking about this, and she's going to bring in the shamanic side of all of this, which is also extremely interesting, and which Jerry is also very much aware of. So with that, I'd like to welcome both. Jerry, are you there? I think you're still on mute, Jerry.
Okay, I just unmuted.
There you are. How are you, Jerry, today?
Oh, I'm doing good.
Great to have you back with us again. And SakTi, you there? Is she?
Yeah. Sorry, I had to unmute my microphone first. All good now.
Yeah. So, folks, where did we kick this one off? Because, as I said, Jerry, the show you were on the last time you were on, and you brought up a lot of very interesting things about people that you've dealt with. You were in the various psychiatric hospitals working with these patients, and you saw for yourself what was happening, that it wasn't just a disease called schizophrenia. There was something else going on. So just give us a brief kind of introduction to that again, just for people who didn't get that show, and then we'll bring in SakTi to bring her side of this in.
Well, I've been on the front lines of mental health here in the U.S. for over 35 years, and started off working in the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet back in the 80s. There were 12,000 patients or so there when I first started off, and started there after graduate school. When I started there, I believed what I was told, that the voices that schizophrenics heard were hallucinations. But slowly, bit by bit, things started happening that showed that they weren't, that they drove this disorder. And nobody was looking at them. Nobody was asking questions about the voices they heard. They would just drug these patients and turn them into zombies, and then, get out of my hair. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. But what I found.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you came in it from your own background, which was, you were trained in the normal way, and you were looking at this thinking from a medical kind of point of view that there was a disease called schizophrenia. And it's only then with your interaction with patients down through the years, you realized that it wasn't just, hallucinations and voices in the head. Well, there was voices in the head, but they were coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, and the first indication I got that something was odd was that the schizophrenics I was working with at the state hospital in the rehab center there, when the chaplain had a ice cream social for the whole building to go to, all the schizophrenics stayed on the dingy ward. They would not go down there. And I started asking about that because it happened time after time after time. And then I asked them a question, well, why aren't you down there? Well, I don't like preachers. I don't believe in the Bible. I don't believe there's God. And then I found out that, when I was visiting and when these activities were going on, I noticed that on their bedside, there were negative books, horror stories, war stories, murder stories. They weren't reading anything positive. And then I got reports that when they tried to read the Bible, the voices kicked up and wouldn't let them read the Bible. They just got louder and more disruptive. So after I got the first couple of reports of that, I started asking all my other patients, hey, what happens when you read the Bible? What happens when you go to church? And it was consistent. It fell into three classes. When I started asking them about their history of going to church, the ones that had weak voices said when they entered the church, those voices would shut up. The ones that had moderate strength voices, the voices would get louder and try to drown out the preacher and start mocking him and saying he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just up there to earn money. He's a fool. And they would start interfering with whatever he had to say. The ones who had very strong voices, they would just jump up and leave, and they'd run out of the church. So I was going, that's pretty odd behavior for what's supposed to be a hallucination. And I denied for years. I denied that these things were separate entities. I thought they were some aspect of the subconscious. And despite all the evidence that was coming in, I mean, it was just one thing after another, after another, after another. And eventually, all of these patients put on antipsychotic drugs would eventually go off, and they would become psychotic again. And it was just, they'd stay on for a few months, and then they'd go off and they'd get psychotic again. And I'd ask them, well, why do you keep going off your medications if you know what's going to happen? Why do you keep quitting? Oh, because of the side effects. I hate the side effects. I said, well, what's worse, being, floridly psychotic where you can't think, where you have these voices attacking you, you're seeing demons coming out of the wall, you're seeing shadow people, you're paranoid of everybody, all the horrible things that come with psychosis. I said, well, which is worse, the side effects of the meds or being psychotic? And they would all answer, well, being psychotic is worse. And then I'd ask, well, then why do you keep going off your meds? And they would say, all of them. I don't know. And kind of, I just kept asking that same question for years and years and years. And after 7 years, I had one gal who was about to get thrown out of the program because she'd gone off her meds a third time. And her mother called me and said, please don't throw her out. I can't deal with her at home. I'm coming up there. We'll talk to her. We'll figure this out. We got to do something. I can't deal with her here. So I set up an appointment with her. And all three of us met in my office at the state hospital. And, the mother started asking her, why do you keep going off your meds? Why do you keep going off your meds? And she said, well, you won't believe me. You won't believe me if I told you. And I told her, you're probably not going to be able to tell me anything I haven't heard. I mean, I've been working in this place for 7 years. I've heard some very strange things. So she said, okay, all right, I'll tell you. She said, the voices told me to go off the medications because the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And I went, holy cow. Because what I'd noticed earlier was that psychiatrists were getting beat up in the state hospital at a rate much higher than any other doctor or any other staff member other than attendants who were working on the wards full time. I mean, it seemed like every couple of weeks, one of them was getting pounded by a schizophrenic. And it was like, what are they doing to piss these people off in 15 or 20 minutes? That's all they saw them every month. And why are they getting pounded? Then it made sense. It was more than one patient who was believing that the psychiatrist was poisoning them. And they would point, the voices would point to the side effects of the medications and tell the patient, see, you're being poisoned. Look at how you feel. You're anxious. You feel numb. You're having all these bad side effects. He's poisoning you. And in effect, they were being poisoned because these drugs are poisonous. They rot out the peripheral nervous system and they shrink the brains of these people with long-term use. More than 60% of schizophrenics who are on these antipsychotic meds for more than 6 months are starting to suffer permanent irreversible brain damage. And they don't tell them about this. I've never seen a psychiatrist sit a patient down and tell them that the drugs are toxic, that they're rotting out their nervous systems, that they're shrinking their brains, they're causing damage. They will not tell them that. So after 7 years at the state hospital, I went back to graduate school in the PhD program. Stayed there 2 years before I just couldn't stand it anymore. It was exactly what they say. It was piled higher and deeper. They didn't know anything. They didn't know anything about schizophrenia. Most of them had never worked in a psychiatric hospital. The most experience they had on the front lines was working in a student counseling center. And here they were telling me all this stuff about, psychopathology, and I'm like sitting, reflecting back on my experience and going, no, that's not how it works. That's not what it does. And it was all this intellectual stuff without any of the, frontline experience of being there. So I finally couldn't deal with it anymore. I started getting depressed, and I left for Arizona, found a job in a psychiatric hospital there. And then I got a job at the state prison in the psychology department. Now, while I was at the state hospital, I really couldn't do a lot of experimentation because one of the unwritten rules of the state hospital was you don't upset psychotic patients because you never know what they're going to do. And they were out there pounding the psychiatrist, so they didn't want to see them upset. So when I started questioning patients about what their voices were actually saying, I was curious. Everybody knows they're hearing voices. Nobody's curious about what they're telling them. And I'm like, why isn't anybody asking them about what these voices are telling them? They just went, they're hallucinations and blowing them off. Nobody was interested in finding out what they were saying, but yet they knew that in the most severe cases, it was the voices that was driving the psychotic behavior. And that showed up most clearly when patients said, hey, the voices are telling me to kill myself. So when the psychiatrist picked up on that, they kind of went, not on my watch or not, because I don't want to get in trouble. So they would lock them down when they found the voices were telling them to kill themselves, put them on a suicide watch, put them in an empty room with nothing they could hurt themselves with, and they would leave them there until they felt they were no longer suicidal. So it went from their hallucinations to all of a sudden the psychiatrist jumping like somebody was sticking them with a hot rod and grabbing these guys and throwing them on suicide watch upon finding out that the voices were telling them to kill themselves. Because schizophrenics have one of the highest suicide rates at the hospital. It's 3 to 5 times nationally, 3 to 5 times higher than the general population. So they went from disbelievers to believers for that one instant, and then they went back to the way they were, never asking about what the voices are telling the patient otherwise. So it was like very odd, very, very odd. So at the state hospital, I got in trouble for asking patients what the voices were telling them. When one of them went and told the psychiatrist that I was asking them irritating questions about their voices and I'd made them upset. I found myself in front of the medical director saying, he was telling me straight up, he said, these are hallucinations. There's nothing else to them. What you're doing by asking the patients questions about them is you're reinforcing those hallucinations and making them stronger. And he ordered me to stop immediately. And that happened twice there. So I had to go under the radar. I had to be very, very quiet about the questions I was asking and not push them too hard. It was only at the state prison when I got there that I could really start digging into what these voices were. Because if one of the prisoners there went to the warden and said, the psychologist is asking me questions about my voices and it upsets me, the warden would go, get out of my face, man. I don't want to even deal with that. That didn't even break the ambient noise level. So, I started seeing patterns appear in how these voices worked. And these patterns were the same patterns as I saw at the state hospital in Georgia, 2,500 miles away. There's a listing we have of like 23 patterns that these voices run. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run patterns. They're random. So here's these things running predictable, repeatable patterns. So I started trying to figure out ways to interfere with them and disrupt those patterns. And what I do is give the prisoners homework. And what I gathered a bunch of psychotic prisoners around me that I made a deal with. I told them, I'll help you out all I can. I'll do everything I can for you. But, you know, what I want to do is meet with you once a week. I want you to tell me in real time what your voices are telling you as we're talking. So I know what's happening right in, in real time. You know, I'll help you all I can, but I want you to tell me in real time. And if you run into trouble, I'll get you in as soon as possible. You know, throw some pebbles against my window and I'll get you in as soon as I can. So I had a group of about 12 or 15 of these guys that I'd bring in, and I'd give them various things I thought might disrupt the voices. One of the first things we used, I used was a rubber band. So I was working with clinical psychologist Wilson Van Dusen for about a year before he died, and he sent me a book by it's called 30 Years Among the Dead, where a dentist in the 1920s would use a static electric shock to drive the voices out of the person, and then his wife, who was a medium, would pick up on them and talk them into the light, and they would disappear for good. So I'm kind of, Van Dusen said he started sending me advertisements for shock machines. And I'm like going, I can't bring a shock machine into the prison and start shocking prisoners. They'd lock me up. What are you doing? Yeah. But I kept that idea in the back of my mind, and I'm like, how can I mimic that without getting into trouble? How can I mimic giving a mild shock to these guys without getting into trouble? And I thought about it for months and months. And finally, I was standing in front of a desk one day talking to a secretary, and I looked down, she had a rubber band on her desk. And I'm staring at that rubber band, and I go, that's it. Yeah, that's it. So I grabbed the rubber band, and I called in one of the patients I was working with. And I gave him the rubber band, told him to put it on his wrist, and when the voices came, to snap it. And it stung, and the voices shut up. They shut up immediately. They didn't stay shut up. They shut up for 15 seconds to a couple of minutes, but they shut up. Now, I was also told when I worked at the state hospital that the voices hated the 23rd Psalm. They just absolutely hated it. They told me that the voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm like like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan. And I'm like,
that's the Lord is my shepherd, isn't it?
Yep, that's the one. The Lord is my shepherd goes on. They hated it. So what I told the prisoners to do was, when you realize that the voices are active and they're tormenting you, snap the rubber band and repeat the 23rd Psalm. So that was like it shut them up, and then the 23rd Psalm was like punching them in the face. They hated it. So this was the first time any of these prisoners had any control over the voices. They could actually shut them up for a very short period of time and hit them back with the 23rd Psalm, which they hated. So I had, all the ones on my caseload who were hearing voices walking around with rubber bands and a copy of the 23rd Psalm and stinging themselves and repeating the 23rd Psalm. So they had some minimal sense of power that they'd never had before over the voices. Well, the chief psychologist saw that. He ordered me to stop it. I couldn't hand out the 23rd Psalm. I couldn't give them rubber bands, even though it worked. So here I was, ordered to stop it again. So I didn't tell them anything about that I was asking or doing any kind of research with these guys. I just had to stop using the rubber band and find other ways to interfere with the voices. So it was odd that why would a hallucination be bothered by the 23rd Psalm? And it wasn't just the 23rd Psalm, it was the Lord's Prayer. It was Amazing Grace. Virtually any spiritual verse they would complain about, they hated. I'm like, well, why would a hallucination do that? Why would they care? Why would a hallucination care? So, that didn't make any sense. So I started developing different ways and giving them different reading material and finding ways to interfere with the voices. And as it started working, breaking up the voices, and the voices were liars. They were consummate liars. And I would tell them, they lie to you constantly. You can't believe anything they say, don't you? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, why do you listen to them? And I remember that I got more than one response saying, because they're so damn convincing. So it was like they would suck them in. So as we developed better and better ways to interfere with the stream of voices and breaking up what the voices were telling them, all these guys started coming back one after another saying, the voices are really getting mad at you. They're really getting pissed off with you. And I'm like going, well, why would a hallucination get pissed at me? It's like, so I still wasn't fully convinced that these things were entities, but here's all this stuff building up, more and more evidence. I had more than enough evidence to conclude that these things were entities and not hallucinations and not aspects of the subconscious. They were individual, intelligent entities that were invading the thought processes of these people. And they had access to their entire memory. They could pull up stuff that the patient had forgotten years ago and rub it in their face until they became negative. So as these guys on the caseload were getting better and better, the voices were getting more and more pissed off at me. And then one of the guys I was working with, who was doing real well, he turned around as we finished one session in the doorway. He turned around and he looked at me and he said, you know what you're doing is dangerous, aren't you? Don't you? And it just kind of took me by surprise because I hadn't ever thought about it. I'm like, well, the voices are stuck in his head, not mine. They can't get out of his head. So what's dangerous about what I'm doing? I didn't ask him that. I just was stunned at what he said, and he walked out. He just walked away, and I'm sitting there like, what does he mean by that? What does that mean? And I'm thinking they can't come out of his head. So as this guy kept improving, he comes to my office one day without an appointment, knocks on my door. I open my office door, and he says, the voices want to talk to you. And they want to talk to me personally, I asked him. He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you. I said, well, come on in, have a seat. And I sat down, I looked at him, and I said, well, what do they have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. His voice tone got just slightly deeper, and what came out was, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm staring at him like, where did that come from? And he goes, that wasn't me, that was the voices. I didn't say that. That's what they wanted you to know. And I said, no, you're messing with me. He goes, no, I'm not messing with you. And I could look at him, and he was serious. He was telling the truth. And, I don't remember what I said after that. I said, you have no right to destroy these people. And I don't know where it went from there, but I didn't stop. And it was kind of a warning. It was like their shot across my bow. And, this guy kept getting better and better and better. And one day I ran across a book by a shaman, Miguel Ruiz. I think he was Toltec, Miguel Ruiz, South American shaman. And he was talking about these things being parasitic entities. They were sucking their energy. And I saw that after every time they had an attack, when the voices attacked them, they were energetically drained. They had no energy left at all. And I also found that if I worked with more than 2 schizophrenics a day in a session, that I left drained. That I didn't have enough energy by the time I got home to do anything else except eat dinner and pass out. And I was working with sometimes 3 and 4, and I just couldn't deal with it. I mean, I did, and I don't know where the energy went. But I just made a rule to myself, says, okay, just 2 a day, otherwise you can't function when you get home. And I knew it happened. I didn't know why. I was kind of wondering, am I making this up? So I brought that book in, and I outlined the paragraph where the shaman was talking about them being energetic parasites. And I brought this guy in, closed the door, and I said, I got this book from a shaman who says the voices are energetic parasites, and I know you've been drained by them. I feel drained after working with you guys. Let me read you this chapter, or not chapter, but the paragraph, and tell me what you think about it. Because I was always asking them to give me information. I mean, I was constantly after information from them, and I was pretty good at it because, when I was a little kid, I couldn't fight back against my dad was a rageaholic, and I couldn't fight back against him physically. So what I would do is I'd just push him to the very brink of exploding, and then I'd back off. So I was using those same tactics and if I blew it, I'd get a beating. I mean, so I became pretty good at judging how far I could push people before they would go off. And I would use that with the schizophrenic prisoners, pushing them for information as far as I could till they were on the brink of exploding and then backing off. And I got a lot of information from them. Mm. But in this case, as I read him that paragraph, I looked up and here's this prisoner staring at me with this odd, eerie look, just sitting perfectly stark still, just staring at me. And that got my attention. And then right behind my head erupted this electrical explosion. It sounded like a arc welder going off right behind my head. And it's like crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I look around and it starts moving over to the right-hand wall of my office and starts moving up the right-hand wall in a 45-degree angle. And I look over at him and he's just staring at me with this blank, eerie look. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I would look at the wall and I don't see anything. I don't smell anything, but it's loud. I mean, it's like crack, 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 all the way up the wall. It's going at a 45. And I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he just stares at me. He doesn't answer. And it was like, what is going on? And I'm watching. I didn't want to take my eyes off of him, because he was acting very strange. So I pushed my chair back against the office wall because the only guards they had at the medical unit were females. They put female correctional officers there. And, by the time anybody who could really be of any help would get there, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. So I pushed my chair against the wall and got ready to kick this guy back if he came at me. And here's this noise crackling on the ceiling at the corner of the office wall in the back, and it's crackling right over his head. It's like crack, 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 and it's moving from right to left across the office wall. And I'm staring at it and then looking at him, staring at it, looking at him. I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. He's sitting there like a zombie staring at me. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall, crack, crack, all the way down, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right by my left leg. And I'm looking down in there and there's nothing there. Just that crackling sound, there's nothing there. And then it just stops suddenly. And I look at him and he slowly gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. I go. I'm just staring. I didn't say anything, but I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Go. Leave. And I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. And after he leaves, I check the walls. I look for burn marks. I retraced the noise all the way, across the walls. Looked around the room. I didn't see anything abnormal. I went out into the hallway to see if there was anything that could have made that noise there. All the doctors and nurses' offices were locked up. I was the only one in the hall. I couldn't account for anything, and I was just like stunned. I mean, I was just stunned. This just blew my mind wide open, and I just closed my door, canceled all my appointments, and just stared out the window for the rest of the afternoon. I mean, I couldn't function, and I was so, a whole bunch of things came into my mind. It's like, okay, this thing appeared outside of this guy's head, and I heard it. It went on for more than 20 seconds. It wasn't just a brief kind of thing that you could explain away. It crawled up one wall, across the ceiling, and down the other. And it stayed around for a long time. And I'm like, if they can do that, then what else can they do? I'm thinking, like, what did I just get myself into? And I'm thinking, am I going nuts? Am I losing my mind? I couldn't tell anybody about it. There was nobody I could talk to about this. So I'm stuck with it, trying to ferret it out. And there's no way to ferret it out, because I couldn't bounce it off of anybody except him. Mm-hmm. And I was too afraid of him to call him in for probably, I think it was more than 2 months before I got the courage to call him in again. So, 2.5 months or so later, I call him, I put out a pass for him to be brought to my office. He comes in, he's looking good. I thought he would be a wreck, based on what I experienced. He comes in, he sits down, and we do some small talk, and I ask him, I said, "Hey, you remember the last time you were here?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did you hear that noise?" And he goes, "Yeah, I heard it, but I'm surprised you did," saying he's surprised I heard it. And I said, "What the hell was that?" He said, "That was them." I said, "Them who? The voices?" He said, "Yeah, it was the voices." And I said, "What were they trying to do?" He said, "They were trying to scare you off." I said, "Well, damn, they did a damn good job of it, And I'm like, "Has this happened with you and anybody else?" And he goes, "Yeah, I've had some friends where they crackled the walls when they were there." I said, "Well, what'd you do?" He said, "I just ignored it like it wasn't happening. And it didn't last long enough for them to become real concerned. It was just for a few seconds, and I just said I didn't hear it. But I heard it, and he heard it too, and it lasted a long time." And I said, "You really looked strange when you were about to leave my office." I said, what was going through your head? What were they telling you as you were leaving my office?" And he said, "They told me to go get a shank and stick it in your belly," which is a homemade prison knife. And I said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" And he said, "I couldn't find one." And I'm like, holy shit.
Wow. Gosh. Right. Well, we bring Sakti in here on this one because Sakti, you're a shaman and you have also come across this a lot in your work, and you feel that a lot of people you've actually, got rid of these entities from a lot of people, but from obviously a shamanic side. But so what you hear what Jerry's saying there and to what you've experienced yourself?
A lot of things to actually tie in, and I could expand on a lot of them. I think I'd like to give it, I would like to start it off from the beginning, how this all started with me and how I was led along the path to start to understand these things. One thing I want to point out is the reason why I'm here today is obviously I want to make the show with you guys, but I think people need to know what is going on, because I think we have a very serious global problem with these entities and beings.
I agree.
And we need to address that. It isn't actually difficult to address it, because first you need to understand what is going on. When you know what's going on, then you find the remedy. But the problem that we are having is that we are tied in this consensus reality. I think that reality can be compared with an iceberg. So most people ever only experience the tip of the iceberg, and that's our consensus reality. And the system tries to prevent us from seeing anything that's under the surface. People who meditate and do spiritual work, or sometimes also very religious people, get to see things below the surface. And then the system will come down on them and just label them as crazy, and in a worst case scenario, lock them up. I think this is a very barbaric and outdated way of dealing with things. It's time that we move forward spiritually and that we are addressing these problems that are destroying millions of people and their families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my own journey, I would never have believed if somebody had told me in my teenage years that I would have to be dealing with spirits in my life. I would have tried to run 1,000 miles to escape from that, to be honest. When I was a teenager, I sometimes read some ghost books. Children do silly things. They weren't particular horror stories. They were children's ghost stories. But, to be honest, I don't think it's a very good thing for children to do that. And I was really, really scared of ghosts. I also had nightmares. Now, nightmares is actually a warning sign, because very often these problems start off with nightmares, especially in children. Children very often get possessed in the first few years of their life. And these possessions can be in the beginning mild, but it can then invite other spirit beings. So they can have astral entities like astral parasites, which are not very serious, or the entity is in the beginning quite small, so you don't notice anything major with the child at first. But then later the entity will become bigger and more powerful, and so the entity possession may start, let's say, at age 4, but the thing starts to be a real problem maybe at age 15. So it can take years, but when I work with people and I trace back like where their problem started, or if I do a shamanic journey to go to the origin, this is what I very often find. The childhood possessions is most of the time parasitical entities, not so often an actual earthbound spirit. The earthbound spirits seem to be more problems with the teenagers and the adults. And these can be picked up from places, and also it can have something to do with the person themselves. In most cases, it's both. But there is usually a trigger. When you trace it back, these things do not happen randomly. For instance, the person can go into they move house, the family moves house, and in that house there's something wrong. It's haunted, either because something happened there, like a murder, or it doesn't have to be so drastic. There could have been people who did black magic in that house and opened portals, or it could be that somebody died there who had been always very unhappy, and now there is an earthbound spirit. And the problem is that once somebody has had contact with these things, they are forever vulnerable. It doesn't mean like, oh my God, now I'm doomed, it's over for me. Not like that at all. I see the contact with these problems actually as a kind of a karmic challenge for people. So if you have had this problem with entities or spirit, that means that you are meant to get stronger. You are meant to overcome your own problem. And once you do, you can help others that have a similar problem, like many people who overcame other sort of problems, for instance, people who were alcoholics and recovered, and it can help others to get off the alcohol. It's kind of similar with this. Now, my own really big problems, they started when I was about 19, I think. Something like that. And at that time, I'd tried several things before, like other than reading those ghost books, which never had any negative effect other than that they frightened me. I noticed that once I got into puberty, I started to awaken all my spiritual powers and also interest in the paranormal. And of course, being a teenager, I played around with things. We did Ouija boards. I did some sessions where we actually got objects to move. And that was like, oh my God, because, you know, when you read this in a book about a paranormal, it's all very interesting. But if you can actually make a small table move together with another person, that was a bit freaky. And then we took that little table. It was one of these little tables that you can put a flower pot on, and stuck it in a wardrobe. And the thing was thumping around there all night long, which was in my bedroom, which was a little bit freaky. But afterwards, I told myself, yeah, it's just energy. I didn't really think this was spirits. And also, I did some Ouija boards with friends, which I don't want to recommend to people, because it does happen that people get problems after the Ouija board. I can use a Ouija board as a positive tool, but then you really need to know what you're doing and not using it in a negative way. So generally, I'd say keep your hands off it unless you are experienced, you know how to cleanse yourself and how to call only the right type of thing. Nothing bad happened after that. So I didn't get possessed or get any spiritual problems after the Ouija board. All my problems started when I got into contact with a negative man. And as in many cases with people who came to me for help, there's often an emotional component. And that was the case with me as well. Because at that time, I had been unable to find a house for a long time. I was living in a really bad place and I had a really bad landlord. And then I was desperate to find a better place. And I knew how to do card readings. So I did some card readings for people. And during this time, I met a woman, and she said she knew somebody who was a fantastic card reader, and he would certainly be able to help me find a better place or let me know what the chances are. And even though I was actually against going to other people to have my cards read, I thought, why not? This woman says he's good, so I'll go there. Now, this man, he was in a wheelchair. And you know, when you see somebody who has a handicap, if you are an empathetic person, your heart goes out to them and you feel sorry that they're having a handicap and that they're suffering. It was like this with me too. So he then said, okay, I'll read your cards. Before we start, he said, look me deep in the eyes and put your hands on the cards. And I put mine on the other side of the cards. And I did this and looked him in the eyes. And I felt like something extremely filthy had touched me. It was like an electrostroke, and I recoiled. And at the same time, I don't know how, I shielded his energy. It was automatic. Then this man became so abusive. He called me all kinds of names. And then he said he will read my cards, but he was only prophesizing me gloom and doom, like I will never be able to get out of this house. I will never find a good job. And all the things he said were actually lies, because soon after I was actually able to move into a much better house. And I also changed the job to something that was better than what I had. So all the things were lies. Now I was in my new house. And that's when the problems with the spirit attacks began. And I was about 19 at that time, I'd say. And I wasn't doing any other things in that house. I never did any Ouija board in that new house or anything. So everything was going quite well until actually one day I was going to do a card reading for somebody. I got a new person and I opened the door, and to my shock, this man was in front of the door. I didn't even know how he got up there because he was in a wheelchair and my flat was on the third floor. And I didn't want to read his cards, but my boyfriend said, come on, we need the money. And I was like, okay, we'll do it. And then he completely made me down after he let me say what I had to say. And then he said I needed to be trained by him and the witch. I don't want to say that, but I'd seen that witch on TV. And this woman was doing death spells on people. And he wanted me to join their coven. And otherwise they would be taking action against me. And I got terrified, okay? But I'm always one with a poker face. So I said, I'll think it over. Okay, bye-bye then. So, and then I was not calling them up. And he also wanted me not to ever advertise doing card readings again. And I didn't do that. I stayed away from that for a while, from the advertising at least. So I did have some people visiting me and having their cards read who already knew me. And then it started. One night, I had a TV in my bedroom. So I was sleeping, and it was probably the early morning hours, like 4 or 5 in the morning. And I was sleeping, but I could see my room through closed eyes, like some people do when they meditate. And then all of a sudden, this black raven appeared on the TV. And I remember thinking, that's not good. And next thing, there was a sound almost like wings flying over my body. And my whole body was completely paralyzed. And I couldn't move a finger. I couldn't scream for help. My boyfriend was sleeping in the bed next to me, but I couldn't touch him to wake him up, and I couldn't say anything. And this was like the energy is like some energy invading your energy field, and like you're in a kind of an electric field. It was extremely unpleasant and scary. And this came like a wave, and then it ebbed off, and then it came again, and several times. And when this was over, it seemed to take forever, but I'd say maybe 3 minutes or so. Then I was completely drained of energy, which is something that Jerry had said before, that after the people had an attack, they completely drained of energy. I felt like I had no energy. And now I could move again, and I could open my eyes. So I opened them, but then this lead-like fatigue made me go back into the half-dream state, and then that thing would come again for another round. And sometimes it was 3, 4, 5 rounds like that. And these attacks also happened when it was already bright in the morning. And one time when I managed with almost superhuman effort to open the eyes for a split second, I saw a small black figure about 1.10 meters or so, like would have gone up to my waist maybe, completely black and absolutely scary, standing next to my bed, which freaked me out even more. Now from this followed a hectic search for how do I make that stop. Fortunately, I didn't tell anybody, otherwise I would have ended up in a lunatic.
Like me,
Yeah. But I knew that I mustn't tell anybody about it. So the first person I told was my mother. And my mother said, "Are you sure that you're not imagining it?" And I said, "I'm 100% sure, Mom." Now, in my family, my grandma and my mother, they all have the ability to know things beforehand. So our family has got some kind of lineage of abilities, but the others can't do anything. They can only receive. I can do things. And so my mom did believe me because she knew I wasn't taking drugs. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't take alcohol, I don't do drugs. And I've always been like that. And anyway, so my mom knew that I'm not crazy, but she was, of course, concerned about this and she couldn't help me. I told also another good friend of mine and she also believed me, but also didn't know what to do. So then I was trying out different things. I first tried the Psalm 23, Jerry.
Good.
Yeah. So when the next attack came, I knew it by heart then, now I don't. And I recited it mentally because I couldn't say it out loud. But it didn't seem to, it seemed to make the thing more angry, but it didn't seem to chase it away. And I'm convinced that this black magician who was working with that woman who did the death spells, that they sent me this as a punishment because I didn't join their coven. And anyway, so the psalm didn't work. And then my grandma had a blessed Christian cross that she had it blessed in a Christian church where she married my grandfather, who later was a missing in action in war. I wore that around my neck to ward the attacks off. And it seemed to have like a mild repellent effect, but it didn't work enough. So I hung a Christian cross over my bed as well. I was just trying everything in the book that I could think of. And it didn't help. And then something very strange happened because one day I slept at my boyfriend's house and I took the Christian cross off at night. I put it on the table and my boyfriend had a lot of chocolate papers there. And afterwards he threw that golden cross out with the trash and I lost it that way. I didn't even know how to explain that to my grandma, but I'm sure that the evil spirits did that. And then I had a bit of good luck because I met a person who came to have a card reading, and she told me that she was a hereditary witch, and that she and her twin brother both had magic powers. And then I told her about my problem, and she said to me, "No matter what you do, but you mustn't give in to these things." Oh, that was already clear to me that I wasn't going to give into that stuff ever. But that was somehow the sentence that should be the one that saved me in the end. Because after that, I tried a few other things. I didn't know any magic then, now I do. So I couldn't defend myself with magic. But I did know a little bit about runes. So first I tried to draw some runes and hang them over my bed. And the runes were very effective for me because it kept the thing off for a whole week, which was amazing because I had several attacks per night at that time. And this whole thing was going on for over a year. It got so bad that at night when I went to bed, I would almost cry myself in the sleep. Like I didn't want to sleep because I was terrified if I closed my eyes, this would start again. But a human being cannot go without sleep. So eventually I would fall asleep and then this would happen. I become even more terrified. And then finally one day it just came again. And when it came, I said mentally, do your worst, but you will never win. And boy, it did do its worst. I mean, it shook me. It was a complete invasion. I felt it was really like some kind of astral rape. It was really bad. But I kept like a mantra repeating, I will never give in. You will never win. You will never win. I will never join your side. I will never ever give in. And after that, it went away and never came back. And that was the end of that episode. And then I didn't have this severity of attacks ever again. And that thing never came back. And in that house, I never had any problems again.
Well, I had a number of similar things with the being crushed down in the bed at night.
Yeah.
Every time a prisoner completely recovered and we got rid of the voices at 3 o'clock in the morning at my house, like 15 miles away from the prison, I was being crushed down into the bed, and I couldn't move. It was like I could just feel something crushing me down. And that happened every single time one of the prisoners recovered. And I was terrified, and again, I couldn't talk to anybody about it. It was, it happened over and over and over every time one of them recovered. And you talk about that icky electrical energy. Well, toward the end of the time I was working in the prison, I got to feel when these things were angry at me, and what they would become most furious when I went to tell the patient that these things were energetic parasites. They did not want that information out, and then that icky electrical feeling would just hit. I could feel it. It was like there's no other feeling like it. It's like this cold, icky electrical energy that it just starts buzzing my entire body. I could tell how angry they were, how strong they were, just based on the feel. So the patient could no longer lie to me about whether they're hearing voices. So when I worked for 10 years in the ER doing psych crisis, and I'd ask the patient, "Are you hearing voices right now?" And some of them would lie to me and say, "No, I'm not," just to get out of there. And I'd tell them, "Oh yeah, you are, and this is how strong they are. Why are you lying to me?" And they were shocked. So it's that same electrical icky energy that you were talking about, Sakti. I can feel when they were around. One time I was meditating up on my roof. I wasn't even in any kind of clinical setting, and I got hit by that. But it's a very unique feeling. There's no other feeling like it.
Yeah, I had that feeling being crushed in the bed twice. That happened to me. Just lying in bed, and I thought I was awake, but actually I wasn't, I thought I was awake because everything in the bedroom was where it should be and everything, and I just thought, "Oh, it's morning time, and probably just try and get up now." And I couldn't move. I just could not move. And something kept pressing me and pushing me and pushing me, and I kept pushing back. I had to get up. I just kept at it, and eventually it went. And then I woke up. I really woke up, I was like, wow. And that was freaky. That freaked me out. And then it happened another time as well. But that was a good 10 years between those two experiences. So there was obviously something trying to get in there,
I was fully awake and being, I started praying.
Yeah.
And finally it broke and left me alone.
Yeah. And, prayers from different traditions work. Later I got initiated into yoga, and I started using a mantra. I started using a mantra of the god Shiva. And so after I got initiated, I was living in Hong Kong, and I used to repeat my mantra all the time. I would have my little mala bag with me, and I would be having it with me on a bus or on the ferry, on transport, because, in these big cities, you spend a lot of time on transport, and it's totally lost time of your life. At least I can do something spiritual while I'm on the transport. So the mantra became kind of ingrained in my mind. And I did have a few of these psychic attacks during my time in Hong Kong, but there weren't that many, but I did have them once in a while. And after I had my initiation one night, there was one of these attacks where I was being paralyzed and pinned down. And in the dream, I was still in the dream at the first one. I remember the mantra, I repeated it 3 times, and it immediately broke the lock of the paralysis. So I know that this is very powerful. I also know that Buddhist monks can also drive out entities with Buddhist mantras. So I think it doesn't really matter too much which tradition people are using, but as long as you have faith and you follow that path for a while, so it has power for you. The Christian tradition didn't work for me at all. I think I'm not so inclined for whatever reason. But with the Vedic mantras, I've actually had no more attacks. I've not had this kind of attack for at least 10 years. So I've now finally come to the point where I'm pretty much impervious. It would have to be something like on a very, very high demonic level to be able to even come near me. I mean, I don't want to be tempting it. I don't want to be showing it the finger. But I'm feeling pretty confident that I've finally overcome that. So I'm also trying to help other people to overcome it. And the two key points is purity and spiritual strength. I think these are the two key points. The person has to be transformed and purified, as well as the environment. And then you will become impervious.
Yeah, they got me good right before I was scheduled to speak with it's a big broadcaster over here in the U.S. I can picture his face, but I can't get his name. But it was like a week and a half before I was supposed to go on with him. I was down in Mexico, and all of a sudden, my right arm froze up, and it was just extremely painful. And I went to bed one night normal, woke up the next morning, I couldn't move my arm, and it was just killing me. So, I told the people I was with, I said, I got to get back to the U.S. Something's bad wrong. As soon as I got back, I went to the ER, and it was a staph infection that erupted out of nowhere, and it knocked out that interview.
Yeah, that's typical. I've noticed that when people are seeking help and they have this kind of problem, the dark forces, they try to prevent the people to do anything to get rid of them. So obviously, if you had done that interview, maybe that would have changed the lives of many people for the better. So the dark forces played a trick on you, and you didn't have enough protection to prevent that from happening, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, they got me good. So that knocked me out for 6 months. I was on IV antibiotics, but they waited. 6 months later, I went on and I did the broadcast, and it went over good. But yeah, I know it was them because it erupted out of nowhere. A staph infection in the shoulder. I didn't injure the shoulder. I didn't do anything to it. It was just boom, overnight. And 6 months before I could do any interviews after that.
Was it the left or the right side?
I didn't catch that.
Was it your left or your right shoulder?
It was the right shoulder.
Because often these things come through the left side, but obviously it can be anywhere. You could have avoided it probably because you need to do regular cleansing of the place where you sleep and protection. That's one level. And the other one is to use spiritual bath salts that have been spiritually charged, and then you bathe and you get rid of these things. You can also do prayers while you're in the bath, but it definitely has to have some kind of salt in it.
Okay. Yeah, I do have Epsom salt here, and I do that from time to time.
Yeah.
Now, you should charge them up first with prayers if you want them to be really effective, and then make sure the whole body gets immersed, including the head, or pour water over the head.
Okay. And Shakti, you've dealt with, like Jerry's obviously dealt with a lot of people in the prison system and all that, and you've dealt with people who've come to you for help. What have you seen? Is it similar to what Jerry has been through? Of course, obviously, prisoners, they're kind of, something's happened to them, and they're ended up in prison for some reason, and that's prisoners obviously are going to be these parasites are going to automatically go for these people, aren't they? Sadly, and it make them even worse.
You can pick things up from a place. So if you're in a bad place, like in a prison, in a hospital, you've been in a morgue or on a graveyard, this is where you can pick things up from the place. But it isn't only the place, it is also things that people do if they are in a kind of a bad state emotionally. So let's go through a few case scenarios, maybe, from my experience. So scenario 1 is a childhood possession. Childhood possession happens because when the child is very small, in the first four years of their life, they do not have a complete aura to shield themselves. And they should ideally be in the energy field of the mother or father all the time. That means near the parents. But when nowadays we have it that the children will sleep in a separate room, that would be okay if the room had some spiritual talismans and protection wards. But most people don't do anything and would probably not even have a cross in a room. So if the room is not protected and the child is sleeping in a separate room, then these astral parasites will try to attack the child. And at this point, there is a struggle going on between the spirit of the child and these astral parasites. And this will manifest in the child having nightmares. So all of a sudden, the child doesn't want to sleep in his own room anymore. And he will tell mommy, I don't want to be in my room. There's something scary. I've seen a dark man in the wardrobe. Like if I had a child, I'm not having children, but if I had a child and I heard this, I wouldn't be saying, oh, darling, you're just fantasizing. There's nothing. I would be like, red alert, dude. And I would immediately, smudge the room, do all kind of exorcisms. Probably let the child sleep with me in the room for a few nights. But the problem is that parents don't take that serious. So the child will keep on fighting with these astral entities. Now, if the child can actually win, but it's seldom the case, then they will leave the child alone and the child will get a lot stronger. But if the entities succeed, they will steal a piece of the soul of the child. So this is the shamanic way of seeing it. And when a piece of the soul of the child is stolen, it doesn't mean the child is doomed or go to hell or the devil got him. It's not like this, but it's like a bit of the child's energy. And the child afterwards will be weaker. The health can also be weaker, so that the child is more likely to get sick, or you can notice a change in character. The child may be more timid, less playful, maybe bad-tempered. The child will change for the worse to some extent, or may just not feel as happy as before anymore, not having this carefree, sunny, happy nature that he had before. And the energy body of the child will then be weaker. So as he grows up, he will be more prone to either getting more entities or coming in contact with negative things. Also could be more easy to get sick. So that's the kind of first scenario how you can get it. It starts off because you're too small, you can't protect yourself, and these negative entities prey on people. Now, I believe that because of things that are being done in this world, that we are having a kind of an infestation on the astral with negative things that didn't exist like this, say, 200 years back. Sure, there were always spirits and evil spirits, but now it's an evil spirit pandemic, really. It's very, very severe, and there are various reasons for it, including horror movies, because all of this goes into the ethers, in the universal field of this planet. All the thoughts that people thinking, the good and the bad is just the majority at the moment. And then also the powers that be, the satanic people that run this world, they do a lot of evil rituals. As an example, if anybody wants to look at it, just have a look at the opening ritual of the Gotthard tunnel. And that's the kind of sadistic, satanic, absolutely perverted and sick rituals that these people do. And these rituals open portals to different dimensions. I've personally seen portals. I have closed portals. I have closed portals remotely in people's homes where entities were coming through at night. So I do know what I say when I'm speaking about portals, but they are opening portals from other dimensions. So we have things coming through that don't actually belong to this earth plane at all, that shouldn't be here. And these things are then feeding on people and also can feed on animals, our pets, or even horses. I have extracted entities from a horse that almost died from a colic, and as soon as the entities were extracted, the horse was back to normal, just instantly.
Well, I'll tell you, the prison is a feeding ground for those things. I mean, it is like a hog's trough for them. I mean, the state hospitals here in the U.S. have disappeared, and now they're sending all the psychotic prisoners to prison. You know, they used to be in state hospitals. Now they're in the prisons. And that's a horribly negative, fearful, anxiety-prone atmosphere. It's a feeding trough for these entities. As soon as I'd walk into the gate of the prison, you could just feel it. I mean, it was just this dark, heavy, oppressive feel. And we had a saying in there. A handful of us who were trying to do good in there is that no good deed went unpunished in that place. Really? Everything we tried to do to help those people, it was eventually destroyed.
Yeah.
That's very, very sad. It's very sad to hear. Yeah. And there definitely is an emotional component, Jerry. So the person, the second thing is trauma. The person has some kind of trauma that creates a big rift in their soul. And it is through this trauma, when they're in that weakened state, that the evil spirits will start possessing them or working on them.
I agree.
And a lot of stories that I heard, they begin with, these spirits are always deceiving, so they lie. They like to play like they are something else. For instance, one case I remember that I personally have not met, but it's just a woman who called me and she told me a story of her mother. Her mother was like a completely normal woman, didn't have any mental issues or anything. But then she started doing a bit of meditation. And the problem is when you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not against meditation, I'm all for it, by the way. But if you then get off into some kind of new age stuff completely without having a solid foundation, that's where the problem comes in. So this mom was then told by some entity that approached her that the entity was an angel. And it eventually asked her to open herself up so it could come into her and give her divine teachings, because the mom got possessed, and then from then on she had terrible problems. Or another case that I remember, a woman approached me and told me about her old mother, who was very old, I can't remember, 70 or 80, who always had a normal life. Nothing supernatural happened in her life. And then this old lady had a cat that she loved very much. And then the cat died, about which she was very sad. And then sometime later at night, she felt a weight on her bed. And it was like the time when the cat came up on the bed and slept on the bed. And so she kind of at first liked it. And it seemed to, I think, also to purr, because I think the evil spirit pretended to be a cat. And then, so she was happy, and she thought the spirit of her cat had come back to be with her, and she allowed it. And next, the thing started scratching her, and these scratches were visible bloody scratches. So at this point, you cannot say that people are imagining it, or they scratched, that old woman won't scratch her legs bloody at night.
I saw the same thing with a prisoner who came in one day and said that they had attacked him at night and they had scratched his back and tore his back open. And he goes, "You want to see?" And I said, "Well, yeah, show me." And he lifted up his shirt, and here's these 4 marks all the way across his back, like somebody had drugged their fingers and gouged his back. And here were 4 marks that were just perfectly right there. And he said that they did that to me. I had another one who, he was being raped by a female spirit. And I found that odd. It was the first time I've ever run into anything like that. And he's saying that spirit never spoke. All he could hear was it breathing heavily while it was raping him. And he could feel her touching his body, but it never said anything. And I sat back and I went, well, you'd be the envy of the entire prison yard if the other prisoners found out about this. He said, no, it's not like that. It never stops. It never ends. It's always, she's always on me all the time. It's constant. And I ran into a female when I was working in the mental health center who had the same thing. She was working in a furniture store. She was a top salesman there. And she said they would attack her and have sex with her. She'd have to go back into the where the storage was for all the furniture until it was over, and then eventually she had to quit. So I found that interesting. What was even more interesting is with the man, when they gave him antipsychotic drugs, that thing stopped. But those drugs don't stop anything permanently. It's almost like they throw in a mental hand grenade and they just stun the person's brain. And it does slow these things down. Sometimes it shuts them up for a while, but as soon as they run out of meds, they're right back. So they're not curing anything, and these drugs are very toxic.
I actually think they make it worse because when I was doing work on people's energy bodies, that I can feel these chemicals in the body. So I can remote view things, and not just like a clairvoyant, but you could say clairsentient. I can feel certain things, like where something comes from. And the people who have had these drugs, they are more open to entity possession than the people who didn't have them. That means you could give somebody who's completely normal these drugs, and afterwards you would open them up to entity possession. You take like their spiritual protection away, and it changes energetically. I can see that there are dark things in the brain when people had these, like dark goo in the brain when people had these drugs.
And they're dishing them out like candy over here. They've got like 1 million children on them now. They're dishing them out to anybody who will take them. And the drug companies are making over $4 billion a year just selling these toxic antipsychotic drugs that shrink the brain and destroy the person's nervous system. And they don't tell them anything about the dangers. These are some of the most dangerous drugs used in medicine today. And they're just dishing them out like candy. It's nuts.
Shouldn't be without the consent of the person, or at least their relatives, if they're completely out of it. I'm so against these things, because this is not the way how we solve things on this planet. This is not how we're going to have a better future for humanity. In fact, we're going down the way straight into hell like that. And we're creating a satanic reality on this planet by bringing more and more evil spirits in and getting more and more people sick and unbalanced. And there's no return from them once they're on this, for the most of them, you know.
Yeah, and Shakti, you've said as well that these drugs they're pushing out have got possibly some kind of satanic or demonic quality about them.
I feel that there is an agenda, that the powers that be know exactly what they're doing. This is about bringing in like an age of darkness on Earth, and we're right in it right now. With this, what we are now in is the end phase of this whole game, and it will end. The light will win in the end, but it's going to get so much darker. And during this time, people will go completely crazy and kill each other according to the predictions. This is all going to come. I'm not looking forward to it because I don't like horror movies and I don't want to be in a real life one. But we have to be warriors now. We have to deal with it. So I'd like to go back to the spirit rape part, Jerry, because this is very real. And imagine the people who have these voices are not being taken seriously. They're basically all alone with their problems. And
yes.
there is no authority who can help them. I was all alone with my problem, but I solved mine with my own strength and I didn't break apart. But so many other people perish. They're being driven into suicide by these things.
Yes.
And their families get completely shattered. Every family that loses somebody is a shattered family, and they will all be traumatized and more vulnerable to negativity, whether they afterwards become alcoholics or start taking drugs, or their marriage breaks up. But it always has bad consequences on the family. All of this could be prevented if we gave people the tools in their hands to help themselves when they have these possessions. And these tools don't have to cost much money. They don't have to cost a penny, actually, for the most of it, a couple of bath salts maybe. But people can do things out of their own if they're still capable, otherwise the family can help. But to the spirit rape problem is, first of all, I want to talk about some stories that I have about this, which are also kind of very sad, but typical, so that people can envision how this usually can function. I had one lady approached me. Her husband, they had a small child as well. He had a relationship with a spirit being. Now, this lady was Asian, so was her husband. And he believed that the entity he had a relationship with who lied to him, told him that he owed her something from a previous life and they were soulmates. And she appeared to him as a beautiful blonde woman, blonde-eyed, blue-eyed, tall, long legs, whatever, like gorgeous. And this woman, the Asian woman who approached me, she took some photos in her house because she felt creepy energies. And on these photos, this was quite shocking. On one of the photos, you could see a kind of a spirit wolf or dog-like thing, which was completely black. This actually manifested, and this was lying on the carpet. It looked pretty freaky. But I didn't feel too bad about the dog thing because I felt that the dog thing was possibly a guardian. The really creepy part was the being, the spirit. And this was visible behind her husband, peeking out behind him. The thing had a mop of hair that really looked like a mop that you've used to clean the floor. It wasn't blonde. It was absolutely hideously ugly, the part that you could see. And I mean, I see these things when I go on shamanic journeys. I have taken some out from people's energy bodies. Please, people, don't contact me to tell you, take your spirits out, because I won't be doing that anymore. Let me just say that. I have reasons for that. But I have taken these out.
It's draining your energy. It's like it was draining Jerry's energy, wasn't it, that you were telling me that?
Yeah, and I lost 10 of my cats in 3 years, so I don't want my pets to die, even though I myself, I'm pretty I'm now impervious to them. But I don't want everything, things around me will break, like every household equipment that I have. I mean, I don't have a money printing machine to replace everything.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I pulled these spirits out of people on occasions, sometimes without actually intending to do so, when I was just going to do an energy body clearing, for instance. And these are not ordinary earthbound spirits. They are what I would call hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts, they were originally humans. There are others which were not humans, but let's talk about these hungry ghosts first, because I think we're having a big problem with them. They originally was a human being that for some reason after death did not move on, became earthbound and became vampiric. And what they're doing is basically against the universal law, as I understand it, or you could say against the creator. So they're doing something very wrong, something sinful. And if they continue on with that, their body will become completely warped. They don't look very human anymore. They get like very long, twisted arms with very large fingers and claws. I'm going to freak some people out, I know. And start to look hideously ugly. On some occasions when we pulled them out, and I worked with a goddess, they weren't being even put in the light, but they were thrown in the dark abyss.
Shakti, what are the shadow people? The prisoners who used meth constantly saw the shadow people. And what was strange is most of them didn't see the eyes. They were three-dimensional human-shaped shadows. Some of them wore hats, some of them had capes. But they would walk through walls, they'd come in, and they would be darker than the rest of the room at night. And they would just stand there most of the time, and they would stare at them. And then I found out later that some of the prisoners saw their eyes, and the eyes were either lime green or red. And I found that if they could see the eyes, they were in much worse shape than if they couldn't see the eyes. I actually used it as a clinical tool, to find out how bad off the person was. And they call them the shadow people or the tree people. They said they hung around in trees. And what they told me was that if they noticed them and they stared at them, these things would start moving toward them. And then I ran into one prisoner one day who was told me he did an experiment with him and his buddy, and they were shooting amphetamine. So they went out to this Indian reservation in the middle of nowhere at night. And what they wanted to see was, was it necessary to have the meth to see these things, number one? And number two, were they both seeing the same entity? So one of them shot up with the meth, and he started seeing them. And he'd point to him and he'd ask the other one who didn't shoot up, you see the one over there by the tree? And the other one say, no, I don't see him. Well, how about this one over there? No, I don't see him. So they realized they both had to shoot up, and the other guy shot up with meth, and then they started seeing them all over. And they'd point to him and ask each other, well, what's that one doing? And well, he's doing this. So they were both seeing the same one doing the same thing. But as they were pointing them out to each other and asking each other whether they saw them doing the same stuff, they all started gathering around them, and they surrounded these two guys. These shadow people came out of the desert. And they looked around, they realized they were surrounded. They jumped in their truck and locked the door, and they were watching outside the windows. And the guy said that all of a sudden the back of the truck went down like a giant boulder hit it, and the front jumped up off the ground, and they turned around, they looked out the back window. The back window was filled with these things. So they started the truck, and they sped out of the desert and almost wrecked it trying to get out of there. And I asked him, well, did they follow you? And he said, no. Well, what are these things? They're all reporting them. I mean, I've heard hundreds of inmates report that they'd seen the shadow people. The schizophrenics see the shadow people. Meth addicts see the shadow people. What are they?
I've seen them on 2 occasions. I'm not completely clear, but I'll tell you what I'm thinking. And one time, actually, Brian was with me, and we went to the hill of Tara. And we had some very bizarre experiences. Even on the way there, all kind of things were happening, like the navigation system told us to go the opposite direction. We had a helicopter, we had a van with dark windows.
These things happened that day, I remember that.
It was really insane. Yeah. And then when we arrived, there were all these people that looked so twisted, like they were not human. And some of them offered us something to drink and were almost forcing it, like, drink that tea now.
Yeah, Puccini, which is the kind of Irish version of moonshine, you know. They looked like kind of gypsy type people, but they were kind of very strange, weren't they? It was we had to get the hell out of there. They weren't nice. There was a bad energy about those people there, yeah.
I thought they were Fomorians, right out of the story of how the Fomors invaded Ireland. It was so weird. And then we went up to the actual hill, like where that mound is, and there's this little graveyard. And there was one of these shadow beings there looking at us. And it was very, very tall and completely black, and also could not see the face or the eyes at all.
Did we get a picture of that, Shakti? Did we get a picture of that?
I think we did. I think your friend was there and he took the picture, but I don't have it.
Well, there's pictures of them on the internet if you do a search.
Yeah.
And I had one.
We could see it. There was definitely something there beside a tree in that graveyard. And it's looking right.
Yeah, and again we were in a kind of ley line PowerPoint, and we were in a nature area. It wasn't like in a city setting, right? And that's where we saw it. And the second time that I saw it was before I was on my own, and this is a bit of a crazy story. But there was one time I actually went into the forest to do a death initiation. No kidding. The things you do on the spiritual path can be pretty crazy. And I do admit I did take some herbs, but I wasn't gonna get high on drugs. I was doing some serious shamanic work, and these were natural herbs. And I am like this. I've taken ayahuasca about 70 times, right? So this was an ayahuasca, though. I took some other herbs that were specifically for kind of making you go into the underworld. And And when I was having these herbs, I forgot to say that I have this ability that even if I take ayahuasca, I can be completely sober. So I can close my eyes and I'm in the vision, but I can open my eyes and I am completely clear. I can help other people who have a problem, help them to go to the toilet or help them with extracting something. I could, in an emergency, drive a car. Would, of course, never do it if I had ayahuasca. You don't drive cars when you take ayahuasca. But I'm like this, so I'm saying I'm not hallucinating. I know the difference between what I see, what is real, and what is not real. But certain herbs can help people to temporarily open up the gateway so that you can see things in the other dimensions. And I think that with a lot of people who they started off with taking marijuana, and for some reason they open it and they can't close that gateway anymore. Now they're in this spirit world that they are not equipped to deal with. Anyway, I was there in the woods all on my own, and I had taken some shamanic herbs, and I was lying down in my sleeping bag. It was winter time. It actually snowed, and I was completely covered with snow, like in a grave afterwards. And while I was lying there and I was going through my visions, I saw in the vision, I saw this figure, completely black and hooded, that was standing by the tree. And then I opened my eyes, and I saw it with open eyes as well. Even it was dark, but I could kind of see it. And it was kind of freaky because it looked like, you know, the way that, like in a Hollywood movie, when you have black magicians with a black robe and a hood and you can't see a face and all kind of bad things. And I was feeling, is this something harmful? Does it want to hurt me? But I didn't feel that it was going to hurt me. It was just observing. So I just let it be.
Well, the spookiest one I had with the shadow people experience was I was working, it was Christmas Eve. I was working in the emergency room of the county hospital at that time. And it was, you know, it was quiet, Christmas Eve, dark, quiet night. And there weren't a lot of patients coming through. And all of a sudden I got sent one into the psych annex who had been on meth, and he was shaking like a leaf. He just couldn't stop quivering. So I pulled him in and started talking to him. He said he'd been injecting meth for 10 years, and I was like shocked. I mean, what's he still doing alive? He should have been dead 5 years ago. And I was amazed by him. And he, you know, he's just shaking like a leaf. He couldn't stop quivering. And I started asking him, have you seen the shadow people? And he goes, yeah, I see them all the time. And I said, have you seen their eyes? And he goes, yeah, I see their eyes. And what color? Well, they're lime green. And I said, just out of curiosity, because they never speak. I've never heard anybody say they spoke. And just out of curiosity, I asked this guy, figuring if anybody knew if they spoke, he would. And he said, yeah, I've spoken to him. I've spoken to him several times. And I said, well, what did they sound like? And he mimicked this really high-pitched, squeaky voice that just gave me the shivers just listening to it. And then I started asking him, well, what were they telling you? And as soon as I did that, all of a sudden he stopped shaking. He went completely still. His eyes got wide open black. And he's just, this being is just staring at me out of his eyes. It was no longer him. It was something else. And I could just see these dark pools of hatred. I've never felt such dark, cold, deep hatred in my life. I've never. And here's these eyes just staring at me. And the feeling I got is, you know, I'd rather, you know, cut your guts open, spread you all over this wall than say another word to you. And I'm like shocked, but you can't show any fear in these situations. I mean, because if you show fear, they got you. So here's this eyeball to eyeball where I'm staring at it and he's staring at me, and I'm weirded out staring back, and then it just breaks. And then his normal gait came back, his normal eyes came back. He started shaking and quivering again, and I'm like, holy crap, what just happened? You know, so I went back and I said, well, you know, what did they tell you? What did they tell you to do? I had to find out. And he said, well, they told me to jump in front of traffic and that I wouldn't get hurt. And I said, well, what'd you do? What happened? And he said, well, I went out to the road and I jumped in front of a truck. I got hit. I got thrown off the side of the road, and I was laying there. And he said the shadow people surrounded me. They were all looking down at me, and they said, get up, you're not hurt. And he said, I got up, and he said he wasn't hurt. And they told him to do it again. So he did it again. He got hit again. He got thrown off the road to the side of the road, and you know, got back up when they told him to, and he wasn't hurt. And I went to ask him another question, and then that thing came back again. All of a sudden, he stopped shaking. He went stark still. And here's this thing staring at me again, like even angrier. And it just with this deep, dark hatred that just seemed to go forever. You know, I've never felt such hatred in my life. And it went on for like eternity. And then boom, it just clicked out. And I went, I can't take this anymore. Okay, you go back. I'm going to admit you to the psych hospital. The psych nurse came back about 5 minutes later. She said, I can't deal with this guy. What'd you find out? I'll write my report based on what you found. But I'll never forget that. It was just the look that came out of him. That was some other being. That was not him.
Yeah, I believe that completely, because I've seen people becoming possessed in front of me on various occasions, and I have cast things out from people, like hands-on at the moment, on a few occasions, but not that many. And other things is more remote work, because I'm good at remote work. But yeah, I've seen this. I've seen people becoming possessed. Like one time, I think I went with some friends to some kind of hippie village, and there was a shaman doing a ceremony, which was a very mild ceremony. We did take some kind of Amazonian herb, but it wasn't like ayahuasca. It was just something very gentle to attune you to the forces of nature. Nobody was tripping or anything. And this one girl that I knew, she became possessed. And when we were in the tent and we had taken this shamanic herb and then we were meditating, it was all very peaceful actually. And then all of a sudden the wind picked up and it started moving the tent canvas in a really violent way. It sounded like things from the outside were trying to claw their way in. And I already knew, we're under attack, something evil is trying to come in. But we were all protected in the sacred circle round. However, that one girl, she always was very easy to freak out about things, and she all of a sudden ran out. Later, she told me that she got freaked out because we were sitting so close in the tent, and she was sitting next to a man. So as we were all sitting cross-legged, her leg touched the leg of the man, and that freaked her out, and she felt abused. So she ran out, and then she was out of the protected zone. And then after a while, she came back in and she kind of looked like, but I'd seen that look on her before, so nobody kind of took it so serious. And besides, we were meditating, so most of the time with my eyes closed. And then the ceremony ended, and we were all putting our shoes back on, and we were going back to the car with, I think we were four of us, I think we were going back to the car. And suddenly I thought, where is she? Where is this girl? She was missing from our little group. And I turned around, and by now it was dark, of course. And there she's walking over the meadows, her eyes wide open, but spaced out like somebody sleepwalking, with a total vision of horror on her face and making sounds like and it was actually not funny. So, and the others were first thinking she was just like being a drama queen or wanting some attention, but I already knew there's something wrong. So I took her, and all the way home in the car she was like full on possession, and I was chanting mantras all the way. And then in the end, and we extracted the stuff out of her. There was a shaman there, and he was working on her. I was doing mantras, and yeah, she went back to normal once the stuff came out. But when it came out, she was like howling like a banshee, really. And then she was back to normal. And that's just like one example. I've seen quite a lot. I don't get scared over these things anymore. But I do feel this needs to be addressed. Nobody should stay like that. If you have a relative, if your child, your son, your wife, somebody has these problems, do not let them stay like that, because the problem only gets worse over time as these things eat their way deeper into the person's aura and in their psyche.
Mm-hmm. Guys, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I forgot to even take the break at the hour mark. So, I mean, we can go on. I mean, how are you guys for time? Are you okay for time, Jerry?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah, Sakti, yourself? I know it's getting kind of late where we are now, but I mean, it's no problem.
I would also maybe like to mention that the people often make a contract with these beings, and that's a very big problem.
Right.
And they may not understand what they are doing there when they make this contract. Because the beings lie. Like, for instance, the case of the woman who was told that I'm an angel, let me in, right? So they need the permission. So at this point, the person says, oh, yeah.
Consent. Always comes back down to consent every time.
Yeah, it goes back to consent. Exactly, Brian. So you have to be very careful not to give your consent to these things. Once you have done that, it is more difficult to get rid of them. You can, but you have to basically break the vow that you made or the contract with them. You have to do a ritual to undo that contract. Mm-hmm. And that I also teach people. I think it is important. There were some cases where just a person saying it, like, I withdraw my consent. I had one case where this person was being tortured by her so-called angels, and I told her to withdraw her consent. She did that, and that ended everything. But it isn't always so easy. But in some cases, I tell them to do an actual ritual on a new moon where they're writing this down and calling on God and the ancestors and basically saying that any promises that they made and any vows or contract with the being are null and void, and then they sign it and they burn the paper and burn a candle, and that will very often, that helps to break the contract. Then the thing may still try to go on, but at least the contract is broken. Until the contract is broken, you don't get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And other people have made a sexual contract, like this man who thought that this was a beautiful woman, and he completely neglected his wife and his child over that. And as another case, I remember, this was also interesting. I think this lady was single, and I think she was feeling lonely when she was being approached by the spirit being who pretended to be an actual god, and wanted to have sex with her and wanted to marry her. So that's, I have two ladies that I've been working with. Not the one is long ago, but they both were being told by the spirit that the spirit wanted to marry them. And one of them actually bought herself a wedding dress and a ring.
Oh my God.
And the other one thought, wow, this God wants to marry me. And when I told her that this is all nonsense, it's a spirit that's lying, she was very resistant to accepting that. She said, no, it must be real, because I went to multiple psychics and they all told me the same thing. Therefore, it must be real. But people have such flawed logic, because don't forget, you're dealing with a spirit being. So what happens is the woman goes to the psychic, and the psychic asks the spirit, is this really the god? I think this woman believed that she was having sex with the god Shiva. So is this really the god Shiva? And then, of course, this medium opens up, and she doesn't know that the spirit she's speaking is not a benign spirit, but it's actually the possessing spirit. And the possessing spirit is telling her, oh, yes, it's true. And the medium will say, oh, it's true. It's really the God that wants to be with you and marry you. And then this woman feels confirmed. So she's going to 5, 6, 10 different psychics, and they all say the same, because they're all being told the same lie by the same spirit. A similar case I had was a woman who hadn't spoken with her mother for many years, because it started off with her going to a psychic, which is often a starting point of trouble, I must say. And the psychic told her, your mother is doing black magic on you. She's the source of all your misfortune. And this woman believed it, and she avoided her mother and didn't speak with her mother anymore. I asked her, does your mother know magic? No. Have you ever seen a book on magic or any signs that your mother is doing magic or magical implements in your mother's house? No. But she said, it must be true, because I went to 4 other psychics and asked them the same question, is my mother doing black magic on me? And they all said yes. Mm-hmm. And this woman, at least, I was able to convince her that she'd been lied to by evil spirits, and she finally went back to her mother and made up with her.
Yeah, I get that a lot from a lot of the prisoners, where the voices are telling them they're Jesus, they're Christ, they're their guardian angel, they're there to help them, and they can do things that, I've had several of them tell me the voices told them which houses to rob and when to rob them, and when the person in the house was up, and where to go to hide. I've had several of the meth addicts tell me that the voices told them when they ran out of amphetamine where to be at what time, and if they showed up there, some stranger would just show up with the meth and give them more. Another aspect that you guys probably haven't seen is how violent some of these psychotic people can get. I mean, they get supernaturally strong. I've watched one little 150-pound inmate toss 2 guards around inside of his cell like they were popcorn. But the one that really got my attention was at a maximum security block in Florence, Arizona, a huge prison. There were like 3 tiers of cells, and they were going to move this psychotic prisoner. They wanted to move him out of his cell to another cell. And they 2 guards come up and says, "Okay, cuff up. We're moving you to another cell." And he says, "I'm not going anywhere." They said, "Cuff up." And he refused. So they said, you either cuff up and move to this other cell, or we're going to spray you with pepper spray. He goes, "Go ahead and spray me with pepper spray, you bunch of weenies, little sissies," and started cussing them. And so they broke out these quart can of pepper spray. And I don't know if you guys ever been around that stuff, but it's nasty. I mean, it doesn't take very much of it to really burn your skin and make you miserable. But they had like these quart cans in the prison. Mm-hmm. So they broke that thing out, and he sat on his bed, and as they went to shoot him, he wrapped a towel around his face, and they just drenched the inside of the cell with that. It was so bad that their eyes were watering, and the guards were suffering outside of the cell. They put so much of it in there. After they emptied the entire can on him, he took the towel down, and they said, "Okay, now come on out." Or he said, "No, you come on and get me, you bunch of sissies." Nobody's going to go in there after that. He said, "Okay, you come out of there, or we're going to go get the stun guns." So these are these guns that they shoot with it's got a little arrow on the end and a little miniature wire that comes out. They shoot it, and it embeds itself in the skin of the prisoner, and then they shoot 50,000 volts through it, and that'll knock down the biggest prisoner. I mean, just one shock. I mean, they just go down. So here's this guy, standing there, and he refuses to come out. So they get the stun gun, they shoot him, they hit him in the chest, and then they fire it, and he just is standing there quivering. He would not go down. He's just standing there shaking. So they got another one. They shot him with that, and now they're alternating. One gun is recharging while the other one is discharging into him, and he's just standing there quivering. He was a big, strong guy. I mean, I wouldn't want to mess with him. So here this happened 11 times before the warden came down and said, "Stop it, they're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment." So by now it's this big contest, and all these prisoners on the 3 cells above this one are looking down at this contest, and nobody's going to give in. Especially not the guards, because they have to maintain control. They can't be looking like they're going to be backed down by this guy. So they told him, "You either come out of there, or we're going to get the dog." And the prisoners were terrified of the dog. They were these trained attack dogs, and they would just rip them to pieces. So they went and got the dog handler. They gave him one last warning: "You come out of there, or we're going to sick the dog on you." And he's sitting on his bed, and he goes, "Send him on in." So they opened the cell door just wide enough for the dog to go in. The dog leaps at him. He throws his arm up in front of his face. The dog clamps onto his wrist and bites all the way down to the bone. And the guy pulls the dog up to his face, and he's got the dog eyeball to eyeball with it still clamped to his wrist. He's looking the dog in the eye, and he said, "Sit." And the dog sits, but it didn't let go of his wrist. I mean, he's gushing blood all over the place. So with his arm in the dog's jaw, he started petting the dog and going, "Nice puppy, nice puppy." And they're all outside the cell going, "What the hell is going on in there?" So they grab the leash they had on the dog, and they pull him out. They pull the dog out, and the dog's got a grip on him, and the dog pulls him out, and then they beat the crap out of him. But I'd never heard of anything like that ever. I mean,
whoa, yeah, that's heavy stuff. That, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I believe it, every bit of it. From what I've seen, I believe it.
Yeah, and guys, like where we are now, right, with all this vaccine agenda and all that type of stuff, I mean, they're trying to pump us full of this poison shit, okay? And what's that going to do to us, you know? So this agenda is carrying on, isn't it? It's just, okay, we'll give it to prisoners and people that we call schizophrenics and psychotics. We'll give it to them. But now they're going to give us this jab, which, well, you know, we all know about that, what it could do. But this is just furthering the agenda, isn't it? That's why, we do not consent to this. We stay strong. And that's
I agree.
it.
Yeah, you must. Now, one thing I saw that's interesting is, you know, after studying what the schizophrenic voices have been telling schizophrenics for, you know, almost 4 decades now, the language, the message is virtually the same as what's coming from the government right now. You know, be afraid, you know, obey us. I mean, it's virtually the same verbiage as the psychotic voices are giving to the schizophrenics. And I'm amazed. I'm listening to this come over the television. I said, this is the same stuff they're telling schizophrenics, only it's the government telling us.
Yeah.
Because the government is just an extension of the satanic forces that have taken hold of this planet. That's my opinion on it.
I agree. I fully agree.
Do you think, Shakti, like, do you think the government, like politicians, have they been taken over themselves?
Definitely. I mean, they've sold out to evil. Yeah, you can open yourself up, like the woman who said, "Oh, come into me," and they have opened themselves up in a much worse way because of greed and bribes that they took. They're willing to let billions die for their own greed, and I think that they are, demonically possessed, or that they are actively taking part in that with all these Freemasonic lodges. I think not everybody who is in these lodges is an evil person, but I think the higher ups definitely have a very dark agenda. And it's all these different groups that are collaborating together. And the question is, who's at the top of the pyramid or what? Like, there are a couple of very powerful men, but then I believe that there is a supernatural evil that drives the whole thing.
Yeah.
And
What is that your take, Jerry? What you're when you're
I agree with Shakti. You know, the verbiage, the diatribe that they're telling is exactly the same as what the psychotic voices say. They're arresting child molesters over here by the hundreds right now. It looks like the military has taken over. Tribunals have started, and they're very tight-lipped. But there's some leaks. The election here in Arizona is being overturned. They did a forensic audit, and the dark side has done everything it possibly could to stop this audit. They've sent members of the Department of Justice here, the Department of Injustice. They sent 130 lawyers down here. They had spy planes circling over the auditorium where this audit was being done. They've got people broken into the floors looking for anything they can find to stop the audit. They've got paid off Arizona politicians trying to subvert the audit. They've done everything they possibly could to stop this audit. And they haven't succeeded. It's going through. And once Arizona topples, Pennsylvania's already come down here finding out how they're running this audit. It's going to be one state after the other state after the other state after the other state.
Domino effect, basically, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's again, the people who are conducting these audits as well, who are the people who are on the right side of things, they could now be succumbed to this dark forces, you know, because that's why I think there are a lot of good people out there, and they try to do the right thing, and then when they go deep into this stuff, they get pulled in, and that's why I wonder about a lot of, because I knew a lot of local politicians around here, and they were nice people, and then all of a sudden they've turned into complete bastards. Like, how did that work? You know, so something's happened. You know.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen that with schizophrenics, especially in the ER, where, they want to get back out. They don't want to be locked up, and they can maintain normality for a certain period of time, sometimes for 20 minutes or so. Where they look completely normal, but they can't do it forever until they start breaking down and you start seeing chinks in it. But, Yeah, the evils that I'm seeing right now is just unbelievable. I mean, it's just
the
freaking
darkest
unbelievable.
time ever, and it'll even get darker. I tell you, I'm 100% sure we will get much darker and more horrific than what we already have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking forward to it. But hey, this is whatever needs to be endured will have to be endured.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Jerry, do you see that yourself? It's going to get worse, a lot worse before it gets better.
Well, I've heard what I've heard from the alternative media here was that the Space Force took control of that ship that got jammed in the Suez Canal, and on that ship they found over 1,000 dead children. They found 1,000 live ones. Yeah. They found a nuclear device, and they found weather control machinery, and the whole thing was packed with weapons. So I think that cost them a lot of money right there. Mm-hmm. So they're going to go down fighting. They're not going to go down without a fight. And
I think they will unleash some form of actual war. I mean, we already are in war now. World War III is already happening, but so far there hasn't been any tanks and explosions. Then will come later.
Well, they're trying. They're trying in Israel, and they tried in Syria. They're trying in Iran. They're trying to start a war the best they can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. We just have to kind of we all, each and every one of us, we all have to stay strong, you know. Sorry, Sakti.
We will definitely win in the end. And, I've told you before, Brian, the European seers had some predictions about these times. And we are right in the middle of what they predicted, because they predicted the lockdown. And that was one part of the predictions that I never understood, when they said that before the war breaks out, all the towns will be in deadly silence in Europe. And it's like, huh? Like, wait a moment, if it's after the war, I understand it, because all the people are dead, therefore the towns are in deadly silence. And they said that on the market square there would be weeds growing. I think it was alle Städte schweigen still und auf dem Stephansplatz wächst still. All cities are silent and still, and on the Stephan Square grows still, which is a weed. And then now I understand, because why are the cities silent like dead cities before the war actually starts? So the killing hasn't started. That's the lockdown. And there were several other things about it as well. And if the rest of it goes as predicted, then next comes economic collapse, civil war. And then they're going to start World War III with China and Russia. But it won't be an all-out nuclear war, and it'll last, according to the predictions, for 1.5 years. There will be a massive explosion, 3 nights of darkness. And in the 3 nights of darkness, I think, is the zombie apocalypse. Because the 3 nights of darkness, they described that there will be, people will be going crazy outside. And if you look outside of the house or you go out, you will definitely die. And you will hear voices that you know, but they are not your loved ones. You must not open the door or the window.
These are the entities again coming in.
Exactly. And then they say that the people will there will be total carnage. Everybody out there will be killing themselves in the most horrific ways. And after that, the whole thing will be over. And I think that's the 5G zombie vaccine apocalypse that's been predicted.
Yeah, interesting. Jerry, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. I'm seeing them over here break out of this.
We have to try and stay positive, but we have to be ready for what could be coming.
Maybe we can create, we could create an alternative future, but I think the predictions are anyway just a warning. They tell us that it's already gone that far. If you don't do something positive now, then this and this and this is gonna come. So it's there as to help us to prevent these things if possible. And I think we could turn it around if the consciousness wakes up enough.
Well, I'm seeing them over here in the U.S. start. So it's like we've been punched in the stomach and hit in the head with a baseball bat. I mean, we've been knocked silly by this, but people are starting to wake up now. They're starting to see what's going on. They're joining together to take over the the counties, and they're putting in lawsuits, and they're starting to turn things around with these demands for election audits. And I'm thinking, they probably stole your election over there just like they stole ours here.
Oh, they're all rigged. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, get going with those election audits like we have here, and they're proving, I mean, what's leaked out of the Arizona election or audit already shows that they've stolen tens of thousands of votes, more than enough for Trump to have won this state,
Mm-hmm.
And they've done it by a number of different ways. A lot of these ballots weren't even folded. These mail-in ballots weren't even folded. But what Trump did that was pretty slick was that on the valid ballots, he put a ultraviolet watermark that can only be seen with ultraviolet light. So they're able to detect which ballots are valid and which ones are not. And then they have this pile of ballots that was not folded, but they were supposed to be mail-in ballots, like thousands of them. They just indicted this one lady that they had on camera after they closed down the voting place in the counting place in Arizona right after the election. They scooted everybody out except for 5 people who stayed in there and kept putting these ballots through the machines over and over and over and over again. And they had videotape of them doing it. They just indicted them today.
Mm-hmm.
So there's hundreds and they say thousands of arrests going on behind the scenes here with the dark characters. And they're saying they have to take it slow because they've threatened to do some pretty bad things. They took down our eastern pipeline for gasoline. They broke in with some computer virus and did a, what do you call it, ransomware. They shut down the gasoline supply.
They did that. The health department in Ireland was hacked.
Yeah.
Because what was happening was the insurance companies were talking to the coroners and saying, what are people really dying of? Are they dying of COVID-19? And they were going, well, no, not really. So because the insurance companies were very concerned about all of this, so now the coroners are saying, we're not going to tell lies anymore. We're going to tell the truth about how people are really dying, whether it be heart attacks or cancer or whatever, right? Or
over here.
Crashes. And now, and then exactly after that came out, a big computer hack, and all the records now have all been disappeared,
Right. Yeah, we've had that happen over and over and over again, where what they did is they erased the hard drives on the voting machines. Mm-hmm. But these auditors were able to reconstruct that. They took a lot of these ballots and they shredded them, and they had these big dumpsters full of shredded ballots. They've done everything they could to cheat. But the people here are muscling through, and it's not the government, it's the people who are fed up with this crap and joining together and going, we're not putting up with it anymore. We demand an audit. And they have a right to have an audit of their elections. And these people have done everything they could. Soros has paid millions of dollars to pay off these politicians. And in the face of all this, they're outstanding there lying, saying, oh, this isn't a proper audit. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on. But we're going to win this. I mean, we're going to turn this around, and there's going to be hell to pay. I hear Guantanamo Bay is already full. I've heard Hillary's been arrested. Brennan is undergoing a tribunal right now. You got Comey, Clapper, and that bunch have already been sent to Gitmo by report from alternative media. But the military isn't saying much other than, things are happening.
Yeah. Of course, a lot of other people are saying, well, that's just putting hopium in the pipe and hoping that work out. But we just have to kind of wait and see on that and see what happens, But I am seeing some good positive things happening. I'm seeing a lot of people waking up big time.
Oh, yeah.
People that, I know a few people in town have had a few meetings and, 15, 20 people there, and this is all a bunch of fucking shit, and they're kind of going, right, okay, let's try and get the word out to people, and the people. These are people who I was talking to one guy. He said, this time last year, I hadn't a clue about any of this stuff, any of this conspiracy stuff. He hadn't a clue, and now he's big on it. So these are positive signs to see. And I was really happy to see that, because I was kind of getting really worried that no one was really getting on board and everyone was going along with the program.
Yeah, that's what has to happen. You have to join together among yourselves and make it happen. You got to get your elections straightened out, because these guys are stealing them. They're stealing them all over the planet.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So, folks, okay, we go up to over the 2-hour mark. We'll finish off closing remarks. Jerry, your website, and you have a book as well, and then Sakti as well. So we'll just finish off. Jerry, final thoughts?
Pray. Pray.
Yeah. Stay strong. Do not consent.
Do not consent. And Sakti, I'd like to get your email after with the broadcast, because there's some people in Britain who are organizing against the psychiatric mafia. And one of them is a naturopath. There's another shaman. There's even a psychiatrist. And, I'm sure they'd like to hear from both you guys. So,
yeah, well, I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm talking to, next week, I'm going to have Amanda Vollmer on. She's in Canada, and she's big on all of this. She's trying to set up kind of like, let's get away from these people, like just get out on our own and do our own thing and look after each other for the moment, just to get ourselves through all of this, And she's really cool, and she's big on this. Well, there's no actual virus out there. It's a big hoax. The whole thing is a big hoax, and I also know people from the German New Medicine who are also involved with this, that they're looking at diseases in a totally different context of how what we call diseases, how they actually occur. Because again, it's all about, we're all big bags of diseases, and we just get sick. And that's not the way it is at all. It's all about our environment, our terrain, how we deal with stress and trauma. And of course, toxins as well play a huge part in it. So once we kind of see that and realize that, we can change the whole paradigm completely, Well,
these people I'm talking about are wanting to change the psychiatric mafia pharmaceutical mental health system. And your mental health system is very similar to ours. And they want to move it more toward a shamanic point of view, where there is an actual cure that works. So Sakti, they'd be very interested in talking to you.
Yeah.
And you too,
I'm very much hoping that when we get rid of this mafia that runs the whole planet, that we could organize like group rituals for people, where we like have a few hundred people meeting, and we can all do chanting and drumming together and heal those people. I think it would be amazing.
Well, they'd certainly like to hear from you. So after the broadcast, please give me your email address so I can keep track of you.
I'll give you a private one afterwards, okay?
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. And Sakti, your final thoughts, then we'll close it out.
I think the most important thing is for people to become empowered, first of all, with knowledge. When you understand that these negative spiritual forces are real, you're not imagining it, you're not crazy, then the next step is, what can I do now? So it's about purity and spiritual strength. So get rid of the negative things in your house. Horror movies have to go, pornography has to go, any black magic books. Magic in itself is not bad, but things like the Necronomicon or any kind of black magic needs to go. And then you need to clear out your life. You need to sort out your emotional weaknesses, your buttons. Make yourself emotionally stronger, become more positive, think more positive. Bring positive things in the house that are spiritual things, like whether it's your Bible or whether you hang up pictures of Buddha, but do something positive, spiritual in the house, and have regular spiritual practices like meditation or mantra chanting or prayer. And all these things help to make people stronger. And when you're spiritually strong, these things have no power over you.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah. My whole mantra is, I don't consent to any of this fucking nonsense. I haven't done it. I do not consent anymore. I've drawn a line in the sand, and it's great. Suddenly life is pretty good. It's not great, but it's good. I can deal with it. I can manage it. I can't control what other people think or what their agenda is, whatever. But at least I know what I'm doing, and that's good. And I know there's lots of other people who think the same way, and that's where we go. We start from there and move up.
Agree with you, Brian. I think the most important thing is hold on to the light and never cooperate with the darkness. Give them not 1 inch.
Yes. Yeah.
That's it indeed, yeah.
Don't give in.
So Jerry, your website, jerrymarzinsky.com, isn't it?
Right.
And we have
you got a book there as well, so plug your book, please.
It's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, and it can be ordered from the book section of our website at jerrymarzinsky.com. That's MARZINSKY.
Okay. Great.
Brian, you're doing a great job of whacking the deep state. I watched your one of your last broadcasts. You did a wonderful job of giving them a black eye. Keep it up.
Oh, well, we're trying to do our best here, man. You know, that's all we can do.
You did good. You did great. Keep going.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Jerry. And Sakti, you got a website as well?
Yeah, sacredserpent.net.
Yeah, so people, you know, she's not going to do healings because the healings are draining her, but she can definitely do tutorials.
But I can do spiritual consultations and teach people how to sort things out.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, Jerry, remember we brought you, it was brought up on the show with Mark Windows there about taking responsibility for ourselves, you know? This is huge.
That's the factor, the responsibility factor. And that's also what's missing in this world, because if people didn't need a big daddy to patronize them, if they did things on their own, like I'm responsible for my health 100%, I don't need any doctor to tell me anything. And I haven't needed a doctor for over 30 years other than a broken limb once.
Yeah, there we go. That's it. So there you go, folks. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Sakti. Amazing conversation. That's we'll have to do this again and get more people. Maybe do a big round table one time, get a few more people on, and we'll talk more, because we could talk for hours on this. You know, this is such a huge topic, and it's so relevant to what's going on right now. You know?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Jerry. We'll definitely stay in touch, and we'll stay on the line, guys, until we just close the show out. And thanks to everyone for listening. I hope you find that interesting. I know it's kind of, you know, it's one of those topics where it's like, ooh, it's a tricky one, you know. But this is happening. You know, we've got other invaders coming in and trying to mess us up, you know, and we have to know how to deal with them. And,
this is a spiritual war going on right now, and it's getting hot.
It's getting hot, yeah. It is going to get hot, yeah.
100% agree with you. And we win it with spiritual means as well.
That's it, yeah. Okay, folks, thanks very much again for listening. And yeah, we'll do this, definitely do something like this again in a month or two's time or whatever, and we'll arrange something, and we really have to get this topic out there for people and just get an understanding of where we are right now. So thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Sakti. And thanks, everyone, for listening. I'll be back to you again next week. Amanda Vollmer is going to be the guest next week. She's great. So tune in for that one. So until then, take care. Have a great week. Good night now. Bye-bye.
Hey, hi. What? I think the Goyim know. That's ridiculous. The Goyim don't know. I think they know, man. They don't know. They know. The Goyim know. The Goyim know. They know all the things that we have done. And now they're telling the Goya.